Dr. Richard Olson. He is an ordained American Baptist minister, pastoral counselor, and formerly distinguished professor of pastoral theology at Central Baptist Church. He was born in South Dakota and received his primary, secondary, and college education in that state. Following this, his ministry studies were at Andover Newton, and he holds a graduate degree from Boston University. Dr. Olson served as a pastor or staff person of churches in Massachusetts, South Dakota, Wisconsin, Colorado, and Kansas. He has also been a pastoral counselor and professor. Dr. Olson retired from teaching at Central Baptist Cemetery in 2017, and the Grandparent Vocation is his 21st book. That's amazing. Dr. Olson and his wife just celebrated their 67th wedding anniversary, also amazing. They have 3 daughters, 6 grandchildren, and 5 great-grandchildren. So like I said, we are just thrilled to death to have Dr. Olson with us today.
As you have probably heard, my particular emphasis is on grandparenting as a vocation. And the Bible tells us that God calls out of history, including our personal history. Vocation comes from the Latin word voco, call, and it speaks of a calling from God. And it is a calling often to a particular occupation, but to all that we are and all that we had. I feel that I was called to grandparenting out of my life. I had a 50th birthday, and at the same time, my daughter and son-in-law told me I was expecting my first grandchild. And I was a very resistant grandparent because 50 felt old, and I was feeling fairly young, but grandparent felt very old. But finally, 6 months, 7 months later, a baby boy was born. I was not present. My wife was with them, and I was still at home working. We were several hundred miles apart. I got to see him about a month later, and some of the resistance had vanished, but not until the moment I saw him. And to say I was drawn to him like a magnet would be putting it tamely. We were together for just a weekend, and every moment that I could, I was holding him, watching him, talking to him, observing him, and crumpled with grief after we had to leave. And that started the grandparent adventure for me. When he was 4 or so, he told his mother that he and I were best buddies. And I've had a few other honors and recognitions in my life, but none that ever made me happier. So grandparent is who I am, how I identify myself, how I care about this generation of now 6 grandchildren and 5 great-grandchildren, and about their contemporaries and about their present world and their future world. And so, but who is a grandparent and how is it experienced these days? It's changed. Grandparents used to be authorities. And then for a time, when the Industrial Revolution started and families moved apart, as something of a burden, now we're probably mostly companions and have to work out our own role. Grandparenting has changed a lot. Kathleen Stassenberger talks about changes between her and her four women as grandparents. She says, we are different in these ways. We have jobs. We are educated. We live longer. We live healthier. We are mentally more alert. And so families need to negotiate who is a grandparent and what do we need of our grandparent and what are our grandparent roles. As I talked with many, many grandparents, I heard a lot of different roles, and I just want to list some of them, and then we'll go to that first question. Here are some of the vocations that I heard of grandparent roles. A family ancestor, historian, storyteller, perhaps griot. Emory University researchers Marshall Duke and Robin Fivich created a questionnaire called Do You Know? That they would ask of children, do you know where your grandparents grew up? where your parents met, the story of your birth. And they discovered that when children and youth knew their family story, they had what they call a stronger intergenerational self and more ready to deal with life. So that's one role. Another role is teacher and student. My wife, Marianne, taught two of our granddaughters how to quilt and had a quilt camp with them each summer for many years. Or another calling is to be wizard, storyteller, playmate, jokester, prankster. That was my favorite role with my grandchildren, always trying to have fun and new, unusual things whenever they visited. Or as nurturer, comforter, advocate, cheerleader, safety net. When children are asked what grandparents do, they most frequently answer, they worry about us. Or as confidant, we should not listen and keep secrets from their parents, but apart from suicidal ideation or drug use, children may need to have some place that'll keep their secrets. Or as fitness and health advocate, 71% of all children fail to meet fitness standards for an average healthy youngster these days. Or as a developmentalist, or as a religious guide. So those are some of the many roles that I explored in grandparenting with the people I talked about and in this book. So let's pause, Stephanie, and raise that first question. What are your favorite roles with your grandchildren?
We have a question from someone in the chat, Dr. Olson. Do you think that the role of grandparents have changed over the years?
An interesting question is, how did I learn to be a grandparent? And I think women probably do have more modeling from grandmothers than men do from grandfathers. One of my grandfathers was dead, and the other one was, let me put it this way, a religious tyrant. And so I kind of came to grandparenting innocent. My only model was how much I love my children, and I didn't have the time I wanted to be all I wanted for them. So for grandchildren, it's a second chance. Yeah. New grandparenting, we'll talk about celebrations and hazards for a bit, and then we'll talk about grandparents as parents. The new grandparenting means that I'm sorry, let me start that over. New grandparenting means we experience more of their life experiences and they of ours. Here's my example. I had my 90th birthday last month. Daniel, that first grandchild I told you about, turns 40 in January. I've been his grandpa for 4/9 of my life, for almost half of my life. And over that, and joined by his 5 other grandchildren and great-grandchildren, we've lived through many, many celebrations and many, many hazards. Lots of things to celebrate over those lives. Birth, preschool, school years, college launches of careers, romances, birth for a new generation. And we've had lots of celebrations with them, dance recitals, plays, musicals, soccer and basketball games, graduations, weddings, birth parties, and more. But we've also lived with many hazards as our grandchildren have grown. They're all in their late 20s, 30s, or 40s now. Teenage angst, college mental health crises, infertility, divorces. I was long distance from a granddaughter that was a teenager, very large girl going through lots of ridicule and bullying and despair of life and hospitalizations and lots of counseling. I couldn't be with her all that I wanted, but I wrote a poem about when I could, and I'd like to share that with you. It's called Reunion with My Granddaughter, 2014. We hug each other for a long, long time, and then we sit silently, side by side. She speaks when spoken to, but shyly, in a single phrase, just a few words, like a rarely seen fawn, this Northwoods girl. I talk a while about my remote world, and she listens politely. When I ask, she brings out her violin. Each time I beg her, she plays a few more lines, a bit of an etude, a carol, her contest piece. But she loses interest and goes to put it away. She comes back with her portfolio of art, and we look at her chalks, her oils, her sketches. She gives me a pen and ink that she has drawn for me. It is a songbird emerging from a treble clef, an image of a hope, a joy she has not shown. I am so pleased. I praise her warmly. She admits that maybe it is good, though not as good as what some others do. We enjoy a quiet, companionable moment, this artist, this misfit in her family of jocks. But when I ask about friends, school, plans, fog arises. Responses are overcast, cloudy, and blurred. She pulls her sleeves down so that we don't have to see the cuts, coded hieroglyphics of the pain and fears that neither of us can speak. A hard, hard time for her, for her parents, and for all of us who cared about her. Fortunately, she made it through that and was having a pretty good college career, and including a summer abroad in Chile. And so 5 years later, I wrote another reunion with my granddaughter on a happier note. She hugs her grandmother and me when we call strong, confident, with many stories. Back from studies abroad, she shares pictures, experiences, impressions, discoveries, perspectives, ups and downs. She is eager to go back to her studies. Doors will open, potential and possibilities beckon. Ghosts and demons of the past are banished or suppressed. Banished, I think. With more hugs and smiles, we say goodbye. She walks me carefully, unsteady as I am, to the car. She recalls vast sunsets over the vast Pacific, while we await sunsets closer at hand. She now has the greater horizons, ours the lesser. We return to where we return to where the years take their toll. The pain and awkwardness of age, less strength, diminished energy, fewer days until the calendar calls the end of them. Still, we smile at all her dreams and hopes. We'd like to see at least a few of them. Well, I'm sure you have joys and hazards from your life of grandparenting too, or will if you're just starting on that journey. But one of the questions that was raised specifically with me, both of my reviewers, when I proposed the book, and as people talk with me about grandparenting, is about this growing phenomenon of grandparents needing to be the parents to their own grandchildren, parents to your parents' children. In looking into this, I came across a term that I had never heard before. The term is alloparenting, A-L-L-O before parenting. The word allo comes from the Greek word other, and it refers to, it was particularly used in connection with a study of parenting in primitive cultures. And alloparents are the neighbors, the relatives, the younger children, everyone that enters into the care and parenting of one's children. Micheline Ducliffe studied this, and one mother in Africa told her, ultimately, you're responsible for your own children, but you have to love all your children like your own. And Ducliffe compared this to being a modern American. She and her husband were novices both to parenting and to infants, but were left mostly by themselves to care for and raise their infant daughter. And this term alloparenting is sometimes used of grandparents who enter in this role, but not often. But as I studied grandparents as parents, I saw grandparents who are allo parents, and I saw grandparents who need allo parents. Let me talk first about grandparents as allo parents. They're ones who give generous but not total and complete care, but support their children in the parenting. For example, Dale and Nancy provided security care and spiritual guidance to their granddaughter when her dad and she moved into the basement apartment of their house, and her dad struggled through a divorce and overcoming alcoholism. And whenever he could not provide what that child needed, her grandparents did and raised her to a fine young adult. Ron and Susan M. provided care for their two grandchildren 3 days a week as their parents developed a food truck during COVID years with its child care dearth. Ron and Carol took their daughter and her 3 children into their home and provided care as she got back on her feet following a divorce. Julie and John provided care as needed for their infant grandson, again during the COVID epidemic, so that when her maternity care ended, their daughter could continue her career as an obstetrics nurse. So each of those were allo parents in some way, providing something and filling a gap that was very precious, but not complete care, which still resided with the parents. But then there are grandparents who are total and who need allo parents to support them. Sylvie D. Toledo writes, parenting a grandchild is a necessity born of tragedy, and tragedy has no regard for location, ethnicity, religion, class, or race. Grandparenting is colorblind. It is also class blind. There are any number of tragedies that could bring a reason that a grandparent becomes parent to a grandchild. Alcoholism or other drug addictions and abuse, a growing problem. Unplanned and unwanted pregnancy, child endangerment, abuse or abandonment, domestic abuse, divorce or separation, incarceration. Of the 1.5 million adults incarcerated in state or federal facilities, more than half have at least one child under 18. A birth parent's mental disorder or other disability, the death of one or both of the child's birth parents, or military deployment of a single parent. While we certainly wish these conditions did not exist, they're not the fault of the child. When one of these crises happen, either the children wind up in the social welfare system for either foster or institutional placement, or a family member steps in and provides home and family for the children. With the arrival of a child, there's many needs to be met. Physical needs, food, a safe place to live, private space if possible, dental, medical care. There are mental needs, school enrollment, perhaps remedial tutoring. They also need to learn to live in their new world and new reality. They may need help with problem solving, discovering interests, exploring their new world. They need whatever the reason for their moving into their grandparents' care, they need to know they're loved. And the committed grandparent will be attentive to a child's spiritual needs, whatever that may take. All this makes many demands and risks on the grandparent. Depression, loneliness, poverty, poor health among them. If that is not enough, a grandparent may be plagued with guilt for whatever went wrong in the grandchild's life. There's a very famous these days who was adopted and raised by her grandparents. Her name is Simone Biles. Her birth mother had addiction problems and was incapable of caring for Simone and her siblings. From age 3 to 6, she was in the foster care system in Ohio when her grandparents came and took her and her sister to Texas, adopted and raised them. She says to them, my parents, grandparents, saved me. They've set huge examples of how to treat other people, and they've been there to support me since day one. There's nothing I can say to them to thank them enough. As demanding and hard as this is for grandparent parents, there are rewards. I asked Mary, a 70-something grandmother, mother of a 7-year-old little girl for most of that little girl's life. I asked Mary what she would like to tell other grandparents about being parent to one's child. She responded, "How much joy a child can bring into your life. They bring light and life and a whole bunch of love into your life. There's nothing I love better than taking care of this little girl and helping out at the food pantry at the church. Nothing is more important than this for me. This is who I am." And so those grandparents as parents may need us as allo parents. And some of the things they may need from us are help in finding a support group. These grandparents as parents say a support group is just life-sustaining for them. Or friendship that fits the schedule and change financial situation of the grandparent parent. Or respite care for the child when the grandparent needs to meet appointments. Interest, help, tutoring, whatever the child needs. Help in financial and legal counseling and housing. What draws grandparents into this role? Ann Streety Wimberly responds, intercessory hope is the grandparents' hope of standing with and for their grandchildren in the parents' stead. They do this for their grandparents' worthwhile present and future life. And Deborah Doucette, who raised her granddaughter and advocates for grandparents' rights, grandparents long for, pray for, fight for 3 things: to keep their grandchildren safe, to see their adult children come through their bad times and emerge as healthy, responsible people, and to come together as a family, healed and whole. Well, there's what I have discovered briefly about parents, grandparents as parents, and about hazards, joys and hazards of raising grandchildren. In the third section, I was going to talk about 2 things, but I will just mention one and then turn to the other. And one is about, I was going to share a little on care for our grandchildren's future. And we're called to care about our grandchild's future world. What will the world be like? What gives us grave concern about the world 25 years from now or 50 years from now? And I have a chapter in which I speak about my greatest concern about the future, and that's the planet and global warming. And I am reminded of a saying that's attributed to many sources. We do not inherit our planet from our ancestors. We borrow it from our grandchildren. And so if you have interest in that, I have some guidelines and thoughts in the book. I will go on and talk about the largest chapter and the one that's got the most comment and reflection from me about communicating our faith and values. I am a minister, and one of my great pains is that I hope to communicate an open-minded, open-hearted, broad vision faith, and hope the church will be stronger when I finish than when I started. And I weep that it is weaker. And some of the ways the church is weaker is that we have failed to communicate across the generations, and churches are shrinking and they're becoming largely churches of us old people. Religious journalist Bob Smaitana notes, America's grandparents go to church, their grandkids do not. America's grandparents are white and Christian, their grandkids are not. These 2 groups of older and younger Americans are living what are essentially different universes when it comes to race and religion. And quite possibly one of the few places where people can have respectful religious conversations or conversations about religion and values are between grandparents and grandchildren. And I found some stories from people over the years of whose grandparents had profoundly influenced them, and I'll tell you just a few of them and then share a few principles. Physician Rachel Naomi Remen tells that as a young child, her favorite time of week was Friday afternoons with her Jewish Orthodox rabbi grandpa. First, they would drink tea in their favorite way with a sugar cube between their teeth. And then she would hear his prayer for the week and his prayer for you, that would prayer for her that would tell something true about her. She says it was the only time during the week that she felt safe and loved. Theologian Yolanda Pierce, now Dean of Vanderbilt Divinity School, speaks of grandmother theology, and in particular of her praying, cake baking, foot washing grandma and the church mothers in a little Pentecostal church in Brooklyn. Pierce wrote, "Nothing I have accomplished would be possible without her prayers." And then there was Cesar Chavez's abuela, grandmother Tella, who taught his sister and him the catechism in their isolated country home, taught it so thoroughly that the priest had no choice but what to give them their first communion. Excuse me. Kate Armas, author of the book Abuelita Faith, concludes, Chavez, who has been called the Martin Luther King of the Mexican American community, wouldn't have been who he was without the Abuelita theology training he received from Mama Tella. And Russell Four Eagles, from age 5, lived with his Native American healer grandma, who constantly taught and mentored him to be a healer after her in a 200-generation succession, a path he has kept to this day. I read a social scientist book, Handing Down the Faith. It says in some very sophisticated language, sometimes some common sense things. But I would like to just share a few thoughts in closing about communicating and dialoguing about values and faith with our grandchildren. One thing that social scientists say that is just common sense: be faithful, transparent, and inviting in your life and religious practices. They note, and we should know this, that consistency communicates with our children more than what we say. Another way is to explore the possibility of intentional meals. These may be festive meals like Thanksgiving, where a question can be asked, what was the best thing that happened in the last year? What are you thankful for in the last year? And whatever anyone else says, yours can be a witness to your faith. Another step is to engage in mutual conversation about faith and values over the years. What has changed and what has not? What is good and what is not? Social scientists also make the common sense discovery that these conversations are more effective if elders are warm and affirming in their relationships with the young and tolerant and understanding of the young. This is important to remember in the conversations with our youth and young adults, where we may have very different values. One grandfather, a minister that I know, and his grandson totally disagree about religion. His grandson has given up on the church. He thinks it's hypocritical. He particularly rejects the church's treatment of LGBTQ people. This is in spite of the fact that his grandfather's church is one of the most welcoming and affirming, offering weddings for gay people and ordaining gay people as ministers. But it wasn't early enough, and it wasn't enough for the grandson. And so that grandfather and that grandson must live with their differences, loving each other, and find a way through their religious and values differences. Another way to communicate faith and values is to invite your grandchild to join you in any possible service or mission of your faith in which you are involved. If you're involved in a food bank or food kitchen or Meals on Wheels, take your grandchildren with you. What we do may communicate more than what we say. I know one pair of grandparents who go with their grandchildren to their events. Their grandchildren are very involved in Black Lives Matter, and so they go to those events with them. But there comes a time for us to communicate what we believe and what we trust. As 1 Peter 3:15 says, always be ready to give a reason for the hope that's with you, but do it with kindness and reverence. It's important to remember that how important these conversations between grandparents and grandchildren are, because it may be the only places where these conversations can go on. In all this, we need to respect family boundaries. If we and the parents of our grandchildren are in different places on this, we don't overstep our bounds, and we don't overrule their parents, and we don't contradict the parents. We live, and it may be some tense times, but we live what we believe and allow them to live what they believe. And finally, I say, pray and trust. I pray for every one of my family, including each child, each grandchild, each great-grandchild, each night. I trust that the shrunk church that I see today will be succeeded by something in the next generation, and that my grandchildren and theirs may be part of it. Well, that's kind of a quick summary of a lot of thinking I've done on communicating faith and values between grandparents and grandchildren. I'll pause for your questions and comments, and then we'll have a parting statement together. Take care now.
Dr. Olson, we had some comments in the chat while you were speaking. Connie says, I am a great-grandparent of 2 and dealing with my granddaughter. I have to walk on eggshells as she threatens to not let me see them if I don't agree with her. And I think you had alluded to some of that relationship and boundary with grandchildren and how that might intertwine.
Yeah, that's a tough situation, and there are many of them, and I am very sympathetic. I would hope for this person that you're at least able to live who you are and what you are, your faith practices. I know one set of grandparents who, when they visit, they live apart from their children and grandchildren. When they visit, there's no talk of anything. When the children and grandchildren come and visit them, they live their faith. They go to church, they pray at meals, they have their devotional materials out and all. And at church, the family is likely to discover that they know about the children and grandchildren, are interested in them and care about them. But I know we have to respect and keep silence if that's what the parents are saying, and simply be who we are. I fully sympathize. That's a hard place to be.
Dr. Olson?
Yes.
Yeah, this is Rick Gensler speaking. My question is, in your research, have you seen a difference between grandparenting in Western society versus grandparenting in other societies beyond the Western industrial developed nations? I'm just wondering if grandparenting here in our society, with a lot of what we're encountering and dealing with as grandparents, if it's different than it would be if we were in Eastern society or Middle Eastern society, whatever.
Yeah, that's a good question. Most of my research and conversations with that are with Asian persons who are of Asian heritage, but now have moved to the United States for a while. and I hear them really struggling with the changed grandparenting from place to place. The seminary who I used to teach has very close relationships with Burmese people and Burmese Americans, and I spoke with a couple of Burmese American grandparents, and in Burma, it would be expected that the children would either go to where the grandparent lived or take the grandparent into their home, which was kind of what American grandparents were like a century and a half ago. In some of those Eastern cultures that I spoke with, Burma and Korea, there was a lot more talk of the responsibility of grandchildren and children to the grandparents rather than grandparents to the grandchildren. And so, how much authority resides? What do we owe each other? What do we care? How do we express our care about each other? And how much authority do we have? All those have wide variations from culture to culture. And Dr. Gensler, I thank you for your gracious recommendations of my books.
It's excellent, and I really appreciate everything that you have put forth in the grandparent vocation. I especially am gratified for your work. Thank you.
Sure.
One more comment that we had in the chat is from Peter. As a parent of 4 adult children with 9 grandchildren ages 4 to 6 that live around the country, distance can become a challenge. As grandparents, we have to be intentional to provide love and spiritual guidance.
Yeah, I just affirm our being who we are, listening who we are, and recognizing that some of the values we've lived by and some of the values we thought were very important are in a process of change, and it takes the wisdom of Solomon to keep a conversation going, if nothing else.
Does anybody else have any other? The unmute function is working. So does anybody else have anything they would like to share or ask of Dr. Olson while we have him on the line? All right, Dr. Olson, I think that might conclude our time. An announcement for everyone. I'll let you close this out, and then I'll give an announcement on our next event.
Okay. I'd just like to share a quote in closing. This is from Mary Pfeiffer. For the most part, grandparents are not about power, fame, money, or sex, but rather about love, perhaps the purest and least exploitable love that humans can feel for one another. She doesn't say vocation, but that to me is the grandparent vocation. Thanks so much for being with us today and for a chance to talk. And I'm sorry for any of the bumps that I caused. Next
webinar is September 17th. I'll go ahead and send the registration link for that. Even if you already registered, it might be that registering again can help fix that glitch, and I'll see what I can do on the back end. Of course, if you have questions for Dr. Wicker, I'll provide our contact information in the chat, and then we have a brief survey to conclude the webinar that we would appreciate if you could take the time to do it. We're so grateful for your patience and you being on today. So I hope everyone has a great week and month, and we'll see you guys again in September.
Thank you so much.